Well, the EU is to hold a special meeting on the issue of the Afghan refugees. Dave Keating is our correspondent in Brussels. He now joins us live. Dave, good evening to you. What is the word on this meeting where you are?
Well, the big decision they have to make is obviously who they're going to take in and how they're going to be resettled. Don't forget that migration is an issue that has been on the back burner in the EU for a while. They've been trying to come to an agreement about how to come to a fair distribution of asylum seekers and refugees in the EU for many, many years now. And so this crisis has come at a time when they just weren't ready. They hadn't yet come to an agreement here. Now, there are two tracks they're looking at right now. One is, how do you get the people who worked with NATO countries, NATO European countries, how do you get them to the EU, to safety, and resettled within EU countries? Then on the other hand, they're bracing for a possible surge of migration coming from Afghanistan. Now, yesterday, EU Home Affairs ministers decided that they would give money to Afghanistan's neighbours in order to hold migrants who are fleeing Afghanistan, to house them there in those countries so that they don't go on to Europe. Now, that is a deal very similar to the very controversial deal that the EU has had with Turkey, in which Turkey holds migrants, receives money from the EU in exchange from keeping the migrants from entering the EU. That's going to come into a lot of criticism because that Turkey deal has been accused of being an inhumane approach to this, and that EU money is going toward maltreatment of refugees in Turkey. And of course, the accusations about that concerning Afghanistan's neighbors, particularly Iran and Pakistan, I think the criticism for that was going to be even louder than with Turkey. So these are the big decisions they have to make, and they have to make them fairly quickly because they don't know when any possible wave of refugees coming from Afghanistan might be arriving.
Indeed, that wave, of course, Macron making himself rather unpopular by talking about stemming the possible influx of refugees. No sooner had the Taliban taken control. Is that point of view shared across the 27-state bloc, David?
People are very conflicted, and I think you could see that yesterday when EU Home Affairs Commissioner Ylva Johansson spoke after that meeting of Home Affairs ministers, when she tried to strike a balance between saying, okay, Europe is going to be ready, we're not going to see a repeat of 2015, we are going to have plans in place to deal with any influx. But at the same time, she was trying to express sympathy for what people in Afghanistan are going through. And she said if she herself were there in Afghanistan, she would also be very concerned and possibly be looking to leave because she will have seen what the Taliban did last time they were in power. But this is a delicate balance here because the EU was really put to the test in 2015. People remember that migration crisis. There are debates about how much that was really a legitimate crisis about migration, or how much of that was a political crisis, how much of that was a politically generated crisis. But nobody wants to go back to that type of tension. So they're really trying to strike the balance here between taking their responsibility. After all, this was a NATO mission, and a lot of people will put criticism on European countries saying, you know, your abrupt pullout from Afghanistan is partly what's driving this refugee crisis. But at the same time, they're very reluctant to send any kind of signal that will drive migration from Afghanistan, and in their eyes, make the problem worse by causing more people to come and more people than the EU can handle coming into its borders.
And as you've pointed out, Dave, the countries near Afghanistan are taking so many more migrants than any country in Europe is likely to see. So this doesn't stop, of course, people of a certain political persuasion getting on their soapbox and shouting loudly for their own political gains. But let's put their arguments to one side, spurious as they are. You've mentioned that money's been given to these neighbouring countries to Afghanistan to help them cope with the migrant issue. What do you think is likely to come from the meeting tomorrow? What do you think? Will there be anything new coming out of it, do you think? Will there be a new kind of plan, or is it be more of the same? What does your gut tell you?
Well, one thing we'll really be wanting to see is whether there's an actual amount, because yesterday at that meeting of Home Affairs ministers, they didn't actually agree an amount. Now, the figure we're hearing batted around here in Brussels is 1 billion euros. But it's not just a question about the amount, of course, it's actually what the money would be spent on. Will the money be used? Will the EU have some oversight about how the money is spent in those countries so that they can ensure that the conditions are not really terrible and that EU money isn't going to keep people in really deplorable positions? So I think that the key thing we're waiting to hear in terms of this plan to have the migrants kind of camped out there in neighboring countries is how much money would be going to those neighboring countries and how would the money be used?
Dave Keating in Brussels, as ever, thank you very much indeed. And of course, I expect we'll be speaking in 24 hours' time to get more details on what happens concretely at that meeting. Dave Keating in Brussels for us.